Welcome, everybody, to this session on sports betting and integrity within SIGA's Sports Integrity Week. Today, we'll talk quite a bit about these subjects in sports betting and integrity. This is a broad subject that touches on all the other subjects that we'll get to this week. Because sports and sports betting are inextricably linked. This dates back hundreds and thousands of years because human beings are natural-born risk takers. Some North American tribes, for example, would bet on lacrosse matches by piling up valuables on the side of the pitch and then tying them all together with a rope. This would make for these fascinatingly ostentatious displays of risked wealth that would loom over the players. And the winner of this would then be able to conveniently grab that rope and take away the winnings after the match. Even in the games that are actively played still across the world today, these earliest rules are informing so much of what we do. Some of the earliest rules in cricket and golf were written on the continent of Europe to resolve betting disputes. Horse racing was actually created for the very purpose of betting, and the sport itself to this day is often protected by its betting product. And throughout history, in this same sports betting and human behavior interaction, we've seen that there will always be someone, some group who seek to find the loophole to exploit market weaknesses, and in some cases, make those loopholes and weaknesses themselves. Sport is a global phenomenon, and its opportunities bring global risks that are increasingly complex and sophisticated. Sport faces issues in doping, institutional corruption, governance, representation of women, sport washing, and more. And betting is unique in its relationship with sport when it comes to risk. There aren't just the cultural, political, criminal, and even general financial elements that we see in other forms of sport manipulation. Betting-related crime in sport introduces a direct financial advantage on which a lot of perpetrators will quickly capitalize. In match fixing, for example, the crime generates a clear economic implication in the form of betting market corruption. In essence, a fixer corrupts a stable betting market by capitalizing on insider information. They make their wagers at a more valuable price than is offered due to knowledge of a predetermined outcome. This exploits the fact that the bookmaker's line has been set based on what we would now know to be imperfect information, and that corrupts the market's equilibrium. Economics also provides us with a fairly straightforward supply-demand framework. The supply comes from the sport insiders, the on-field players, athletes, officials, and the demand comes from the bettors, from the individual player up to a full-on syndicate who have an aim to profit on exploiting trades in that forced market inefficiency. And keep in mind, these are, of course, not the only stakeholders in a betting-related breach of sports integrity. As our two panelists will further explain, we also have to consider the perspectives of off-field players, the athlete employers like the clubs and the leagues, player agents, sport operators, event betting operators, and more. And also, economics isn't the only consideration of this matter. From a cultural perspective, as will be discussed all week here, sport has long been a bastion of honor and strength in a community and society. Sumo wrestling, for example, is a 2,000-year-old tradition with a focus on ritual and history that's unparalleled in athletics. Corruption actively affects this sort of thing. In the home of at least two of us on this screen, after Las Vegas experienced the largest mass shooting in U.S. history in 2017, the community coalesced around the then brand new Golden Knights ice hockey team. And of course, this offers me a prime opportunity to brag about the fact that the Las Vegas Golden Knights are the current Stanley Cup champions. And as so many of those who would attend something like SIGA's Sport Integrity Week, I feel pretty confident in saying that because sport fills such a role in society, anything that breaches its integrity is felt strongly by the people who love it. If the integrity of the game is compromised, the brand's reputation is compromised across the board, resulting in fines, the loss of game day attendance, loss of sponsors, and more. All the way down the pipeline, Parents may deter their children from taking up sports that are underneath the shadow of scandal. And organized sporting competition may go so far as to completely shut down. The Korean Esports Association discontinued their StarCraft Pro League in 2016, naming match fixing as one of the major reasons behind that decision. And some of the betting products we see growing in popularity are also risk factors in sport. In-play betting in particular can be a risk factor in competition because athletes have more control over the outcome of these narrow scope events. New technologies have evolved in unique ways that affect not just gambling and sport, but also the peripheral industries around them that in turn affect game integrity. And like so many of the other subjects in sport integrity that will be discussed this week, we may never achieve a perfect solution to the issue. But if we attack it on all sorts of different fronts, we can contribute greatly to mitigating the harm that comes out of corruption in sport. Just like those who corrupt sport continue to innovate, so too do those dedicated to safeguarding the integrity. Corruption can be self-reinforcing, and good governance is really a prerequisite for protecting both betting and sport. And it's my honor to be the one to host this session and thus be the one to provide this kind of so what background, because it's easy for me to declare that betting and sport corruption is bad. It's the what, the who, the how that makes this such a complex space. And today we'll learn about the threats that exist, while also learning more about what we can do. Who are the major players? What's the size of the thing? And what are the various ways in which it manifests? Where are the vulnerabilities? And most importantly, what are some of the real meaningful action items for all of us? These are the areas that these experts on screen will address for the rest of this hour. I'm Brett Abarbanel, Executive Director of the University of Nevada, Las Vegas International Gaming Institute, and I'm your moderator today. And I'm joined by two brilliant panelists who have kindly offered their time to share their knowledge. Matthew Holt, President and CEO of US Integrity, and Lorraine Pierman, Director of Evolve Sports Integrity. Now, we're lucky to be able to show the viewers of SIGA Sports Integrity Week the wide variety of different stakeholders and experiences that exist in this world of betting integrity. So I'm going to have you start by introducing yourselves. Who are you and what do you and your company do? How did you get to this place, to this area? And I'm going to start with Matt, and then we'll turn to Lorraine, who will also follow up by doing a little level setting and giving us a background of the major stakeholders in the betting integrity arena and the process that typically happens in identification all the way to prosecution. So with that, Matt, let me turn it over to you to introduce yourself, please.
Thanks, Brett. My name is Matthew Holt, President, CEO, and co-founder of US Integrity. And I used to work at a company called Cantor Gaming. I was the SVP of business development there and the chief operating officer of their sister company, CG Analytics, which was the licensed information service provider here in the state of Nevada. We ran 8 of the largest strip properties, the sports books in those properties. And we launched the first regulated mobile sports betting app in the state of Nevada. And at the time, we also started to launch some fairly rudimentary game integrity and fraud prevention services with many of the major professional collegiate sports leagues. And as time went on and we saw all the injunctions against sports betting, I got to know those leagues pretty well and understood that sports betting, those injunctions and PASPA was likely to be repealed in Q2 of 2018. So we started looking ahead at the 4 states, Delaware, Mississippi, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, that already had regs in place and that were going to launch immediately after the repeal of PASPA. And using New Jersey as an example, like many of the states, it had a mandate that operators contract with a licensed independent integrity monitor, and there weren't any. So we started US Integrity with the idea that we want to use technology and data first in our approach to game integrity and fraud prevention. And it's been amazing since. We now work with almost every major professional and collegiate sports league, NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, NHL, UFC, SEC, Pac-12, Big 12, the Big 10, most of the major professional collegiate sports leagues, and I think 94 of 96 regulated sportsbook operators in North America. We're licensed in 38 states as well as Ontario, Puerto Rico, and we're really excited about where game integrity and fraud prevention was and where it is now and where it could be using that same technology and data-driven focus.
Thanks so much, Matthew. And Lorraine?
Oh, hello. So I'm Lorraine Pearman, and I'm co-director of Evolve Sports Integrity. And Evolve are with sports betting integrity specialists working across a range of sectors. So my involvement in this whole world of match fixing began in 2011. When I joined the Gambling Commission of Great Britain on a secondment from a government department to set up what became known as the Joint Assessment Unit. And the aim of this unit was to protect the London 2012 Olympic Games from the risks of match fixing. So when that project ended, I was asked to stay on at the Commission, where at an operational level, I set up the UK's betting integrity programme and also helped develop the national strategy. I left the Commission, and I keep forgetting when it was, I think it was 2020, and did some freelance work. And then I set Evolve up last year with my business partner, Steve Payne, who also worked at the Gambling Commission and ran the intelligence unit there. So I guess between us, you can say that Evolve has got a real insider's view to tackling betting integrity. We've been at the heart of the action for over 13 years. And so we're now using that knowledge and expertise to help betting operators, regulators, sport, law enforcement to manage their risks that threaten the integrity of sport and sports betting.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for agreeing to do this sort of background that we really need to understand what the betting integrity arena looks like. Can you do an overview for us of kind of what do the major stakeholders look like in this fight against corruption, and what's that process that the whole thing goes through?
Okay, so I've just prepared, I prepared a slide that hopefully you can see now on screen. So what I'm going to do is talk you through the basic high-level process of managing cases involving suspected betting integrity on an operational level. I'm going to talk you through a model that's known as a national platform, and this model is used throughout Europe and beyond. So let's have a think about the stakeholders. So in the top left-hand corner of the screen, you'll see the box saying stakeholders. The main stakeholders in this process will always be sport, the betting industry, law enforcement, and gambling regulators. There may be others depending on the setup in your jurisdiction, but these will always be the main four. And the key to this whole process, and it sounds sort of simple, but the key is working together and understanding and respecting each other's agendas. And that isn't always easy, and I speak from experience on that. And the process starts with a report or an alert about something that raises suspicion about potential match fixing. So it might be from a betting operator who's seen some specific suspicious activity on the markets. And of course, to facilitate this type of alert, the gambling regulator would need to have robust license conditions in place, and operators need to be positioned to be able to comply. But it could also come from a tip-off from within a sport. There are many different places this information could come from. But information sharing is also a critical part of this process, and it's the importance of being able to receive, disseminate, and store information, and you need to be able to know what to do with it. So within the model, within the national platform model, you've got a central information hub, and this is where any information about potential match fixing cases are sent. And the hub can sit where you want it to sit. In the UK, it's a team within the gambling regulator. Finland has an independent body that undertakes this role. In Denmark, it sits within anti-doping. So the model is very flexible. So the alert would go into the information hub, where they undertake a triage process, which is basically gathering intelligence. So, for example, if suspicions begin with an alert from an operator, you'd start by requesting betting data on the relevant markets from your operators. The hub gathers the required intelligence to allow them to make an assessment on what is most effective course of action. Now, hopefully, you've got enough intelligence for a criminal investigation. And what that investigation will be looking for is the links between the bettors, the fixers, and the players. And the evidence you'd look at are things like, what is the betting data telling you? What are the suspicious indicators? And there are a number of indicators within betting data that can point to match fixing. You'd look at footage from the match, you'd consult with the sport, you'd have interviews with those suspected of being involved. You look at suspects' phone data and information from bank accounts and so on. It's building the case to find the links. So if you can do all that, you then need an offence under which you can prosecute. It doesn't have to be a specific match fixing offence. Some jurisdictions have that. In the UK, we don't. We have a suite of different offences under which you could try and prosecute. But the evidence that you've gathered needs to be able to prove the offence has been committed. And then hopefully you prosecute and go to trial. Now, there might not be enough evidence to go with a criminal prosecution, but there may be enough for a sport to conduct their own investigation under their own betting rules. I mean, it may be decided that both will run, a sports and a law enforcement investigation will run at the same time, in which case it's really important to have a process in place that facilitates parallel investigations. So, for example, you wouldn't want a sports investigation to jeopardize a criminal investigation or vice versa. And then we come to the outcomes and outputs. You know, what might these be? Well, obviously a criminal prosecution, if you manage to prove those links between the bettors, the fixers and the players, it could result in jail time, financial penalties, or both, but both the players and from any of those people who sit outside of the sport. Sports investigations can result in bans and suspensions from the sport and financial penalties, obviously only for those involved in the sport. But as we know, a ban on a player's career, it can be career ending. And you could find evidence of other activity that needs to be investigated. So these are things like tax or ID fraud, money laundering, even people trafficking can come into play. And at the end of the day, the hub might only have some intel that they save on their databases to inform future cases. But yeah, that is a really an important part of the jigsaw, because a snippet of seemingly irrelevant intel now could be a golden nugget further down the line. And I speak about this model with experience as I helped set up and run the UK's national platform, and I've worked with various different platforms throughout Europe and beyond. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants to get in touch about this process if you'd like to find out more. And I'm back over to Brett. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Lorraine. Something that's very clearly so core to this, and of course, whenever we talk about sport integrity, is the illegal elements of this, right? There's criminality that is this underlying theme of the entire process that you discussed here. So Matt, I'm going to turn to you here, right? When we cover this, it's this goal of eradicating the illegal thing. And when we talk about this on the gambling side of things, right, there's always a very, very heavy discussion on regulatory policy and legal elements, right? How do we get rid of illegal gambling? And this always leads to a further question. Okay, great, but how big is illegal gambling? So let's look at this question parallel here on the integrity side. How big is the size of this problem? What does U.S. integrity see in terms of the volume of the thing? How do we determine that size? And then more specifically, can you speak to some of perhaps these sub areas, right? Perhaps match fixing, if there's spot fixing elements here, other sorts of manipulation you might catch with U.S. integrity.
Sure. So we average probably 15 to 18 alerts a month, about half of which lead to suspensions, bans, and arrests related to nefarious sports betting activity. And that's not always criminal match fixing. It's misuse of insider information. It's illegal betting. It's prohibited bettors, people betting on their own events. Even if they're betting on their team to perform in a positive outcome, it is violating that state regulatory environment. So if we look at that and we say, okay, we have 15 to 18 alerts a month, half of which lead to suspensions, bans, and arrests, we're talking about 100 instances a year where players are fined, arrested, or banned related to nefarious sports betting activity. And that seems to hold steady. There are a couple of individualized sports that tend to have higher rates of integrity issues than the team sports. But if we take team sports really on a global basis, we can put a number to it it's about 1 out of every 500 events really has some type of activity that's deemed to be abnormal or suspicious. And that number has held true. We started in 2018, since May 14, 2018, with the repeal of PASPA. Here we are over 5 years later. And those numbers have really held steady outside of esports and a couple of individualized sports that have higher instances of integrity issues. So at the end of the day, I think one of the key misnomers that we have to get past with integrity is that it's always match fixing. And that's not always the case. Misuse of inside information is rampant. And why is it so important that we don't let people misuse inside information? Because if they fraudulently take advantage of the sports books, that also takes away taxable income from the states. And at the end of the day, why do all these jurisdictions pass legal and regulated sports betting? To add taxable revenue to the jurisdiction to fund programs like roads and schools and everything else. So when we allow people to commit fraudulent activity, we're taking out of those coffers. And that's why people take it so seriously. It's not just the bookies or the sports books that lose money. It's the programs that those taxable dollars fund. And another one of the things we see is traditional match fixing, as we see it in the US, the Chicago Black Sox of 1919 going back, or Toledo or Arizona State or Northwestern, or some of the Boston College, some of the team incidents we've had here isn't really how we see the majority of game manipulation or match fixing taking place in 2023. With the advancement of in-play betting, prop wagering, and micro betting, it's much easier to go to one individual and fix a small portion of an event or an individual player performance stat than it is to try to get an entire team or officiating crew on board. So I think, we have to remember that this is a really broad topic now. It's no longer just match fixing and how do we stop it. It's misuse of insider information. It's game manipulation, which is manipulating those micro portions of an event rather than the entirety of the event. It's prohibited bettors, players wagering on events that they're prohibited from betting on. So I think it's a much wider scope than we've seen in the past. And thus it takes more technology advancement. We always say it takes three things: information, cooperation, and collaboration. As much information and data as we can get, cooperation from the regulatory and operator groups, and then the collaboration of everybody. What we've seen since 2018 that I don't think existed, at least in North America prior, is the commitment from the actual professional collegiate sports leagues. Their commitment to integrity, their commitment to education, their commitment to embrace this industry, make sure that all of the players are following protocols and that there isn't rampant illicit gambling activity within their leagues. That's been the biggest difference maker. And when we get all three of those, as you've seen in the past 5 months here in the US, with hundreds of instances, over 120 just at Iowa and Iowa State, Alabama, Cincinnati, the NFL ones, when we get those three pieces in place, we're really good and really effective at being able to identify nefarious or illicit activity.
Well, thank you so much. And with all of this, maybe it's the professor in me, but I love stories. I feel like we learn so much from hearing about some of these specific stories. And I know, sometimes I can't pull these out of folks because we don't want to breach anybody's privacy or anything like that. But, can we hear the really interesting bits? Is there a really interesting story that you have, right? To what extent are there really good and really bad criminals? Are there more sophisticated people who've managed to, for example, monitor the liquidity of a market and just not get caught? Are there particularly sloppy criminals who got caught the first time out? What are some recent specific cases that you've seen? And Matthew, you named a few there that really help explain the range of the scope of the issue. And this question I pose to both of you. Whoever wants to go first, please do.
I'll have a go first. Yeah, I agree with everything that Matt just said. But I think the difficulty is knowing about the good criminals is they don't get caught. So it's a very difficult question to answer in terms of what makes a almost really good criminals, and are they getting away with it? I suspect there's quite a lot of them that are. But there was a report, I think it was last year, where there was cooperation between Interpol and the Spanish Football League and Gibraltar National League, and that cracked down on an organised crime group. So people are taking it seriously. And I think in that report, I'd noted down that they thought the organised crime group had made around 500,000 euros in profits. I suspect it would have been a lot more than that. And it shouldn't surprise us that organised crime groups are wanting to get involved in match fixing, because they probably see it as a kind of easier way to make the money. It's easier than drug running or people trafficking, or some of the other types of crimes that they get into. And often they will use match fixing to launder their proceeds as well. So it wouldn't just be sort of match fixing they would get involved in it for, it would be for other reasons. The sort of thing about the sloppy criminals, I think, is easier to answer, and we've certainly seen this in the UK. It often happens when people get just a little bit too greedy. So we've had cases where a game is fixed, the smart fixers put their money on the unregulated markets or illegal markets, but the participants decide that they're going to try and make a little bit more money, and they will put money on the regulated markets. In this case, it was the UK markets, and try to make that a little bit more money. And of course, then they may tell their friends to do the same thing, their associates, and that's when the spikes in betting have appeared. So we need the regulated markets to be able to track these that sort of some quite often mirror what is going on in the illegal markets.
Yep. And I think, to your question, Brett, about the level of severity and what we see in the different levels. I mean, we've had over, we talked about the hundreds of instances lately, and a lot of those instances are what we would call, I don't want to say harmless crimes or harmless policy violations, but we're seeing people that education could have prevented some recently, where, a baseball player bet $20 on Monday Night Football, but that league or the policy was you're not allowed to bet on anything as a collegiate athlete. And what we've seen is some of those penalties decrease. Prior to May 2nd of this year, the NCAA policy was a permanent ban of eligibility, permanent loss of eligibility for any betting. So a college basketball player who put $20 on a Monday Night Football match, he's not trying to manipulate the match. He has no influence. He's not participating. He doesn't even play that sport, would have a permanent loss of eligibility. And now what we're seeing is those, and again, we don't want to call them harmless, but people not trying to manipulate matches, the penalties and disciplinary action for those have become less severe. And that's a lot of the instances we've seen, and education can help with those things. What a lot of athletes don't realize too is that wagering on your own events in many jurisdictions is a crime. It's not just a policy violation, you actually violated a crime. And then the utilization of technology, the fact that when you log into a regulated sports betting app right now, you are geolocated to within a 3-foot radius, no different than if you called an Uber. And that Uber knows exactly where you are, so the driver can pick you up. It's the same exact thing when you log into that regulated sports betting app. So these folks that thought, well, if I do it on my phone, no one will know it's me. And, again, it's an education portion of it. And then we go much further. I mean, we saw a recent case at Alabama where the head coach was involved in wagering against his own team and manipulating matches. And that's where we really get into the severity. And, those are supposed to be mentors. Those are supposed to be the role models. And I think when those folks take that step way over the line, that's when we tend to, react further and have much more deeper emotional reactions to it than we do when a college basketball player bets $20 on a Monday Night Football match.
Well, this is wonderful because you have now both opened up multiple streams of different discussions that we can have here on these different subjects. So let me start with the most immediate one, right? Matthew, you were just talking about player betting and the not necessarily harmless, but not necessarily manipulative types of wagers that are happening, because player betting, right, it's not necessarily a sport integrity issue, but it speaks to a broader discussion around all these calls for education. I mean, you've mentioned education now, I think it was 3 times, though I'm sure that since this is being recorded, someone will count and let me know if I'm wrong. And of course, as a professor, I love education. I'm a huge advocate for this. And players are clearly placing bets, right? What can we do? What are some meaningful things that we might be able to do to improve the effectiveness or even just make people more aware, athletes more aware within this educational space? How do we get them to be more aware of what policies are, and then also implementing and enforcing effective policies, right? You talked about the very strict policies that NCAA has had that have now loosened up quite a bit, for example.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's interesting. I think this recent run in 2023 has really got the attention of both collegiate and professional leagues for the need for further education. At the end of the day, I run a business in the regulated sports betting markets in the US, and I have a hard time keeping up. It's not just 50 states, 50 sets of rules in the US. When you add in all the tribal jurisdictions who negotiate their own compacts, you have over 250 different gaming jurisdictions just in the United States alone. That's 250 sets of rules. It would be hard for me to keep up, never mind a student athlete on a collegiate campus. How are they supposed to know all these rules and all these different jurisdictions? And I think the answer is education, education, education. As much on-site, in-person education as we can do, mobile education, materials, people that they can speak to when they have questions, a safe haven where they can go to ask these questions. At the end of the day, that's one of the big keys is education. Because again, those crimes aren't harmless, but when we talk about players betting, there's different levels. A player betting on a different sport, which they don't participate, is one thing. But players betting on their own sport, I'm very much an advocate for the rules that are in place and how important they are. And I always use an example. Let's use a player who's retired, at least for now, Tom Brady, and say if Tom Brady bet on his own personal over-under touchdown passes in a game. So Tom Brady bets on himself to throw more than 2.5 touchdown passes in a game. So he has to throw 3. And everyone thinks, oh, well, he's betting on himself to do a positive. But if they get the ball down to the 1-yard line and it's 1st and goal from the 1, the statistics probably say you should run the football. You're less likely to turn it over and more likely to score the touchdown. But Tom Brady might want to throw the football because he needs to get those 3 passing touchdowns. Thus, it could alter the Tom Brady's decision-making and have an effect on the game. That's why we don't let players bet on their own events, even if they're betting on their own teams to do something positive, because it could alter the way the game is played, alter the eventual outcome of the game, and thus those rules have to be in place. But you're right, there are vastly different severity levels of players betting if they're betting on other sports or certainly if they're betting on their own.
This is why I love stories so much, because as you're describing the situation with Tom Brady, and I'm going to assume a lot of people who are watching this have this familiarity, right? I've yelled at a situation like this. I've seen this on the screen. At the very least, I grumbled in disagreement with what that player on the field chose to do. And of course, those who have placed wagers on the game probably feel that much stronger. We know that people who place bets on games have that much more involvement in the game. We see this over and over in research. And with a lot of what you've described, Matt, and Lorraine, this speaks to what you've talked about too, is kind of the public-facing image of this. Lorraine, you spoke to, for example, an example that made the news. Matthew, you've talked about the hundreds of examples out of Iowa. When we think about the Alabama example, these are all things that absolutely hit the news, and it tends to get quite sensationalized, right? When we see betting scandals reported in the press, what the newspapers have to sell papers, right? They have to sell readership online. So there's a ton, sometimes it's a bit more sensational, right? Both of you work within this broad spectrum of sports and betting integrity. What does the reality look like? And Lorraine, I'll turn to you first with this one, especially given your background with some of this regulatory and framework development. What does the reality look like compared to what we might see in common headlines on the internet? Is it really that sensational, or is it a little bit different?
Well, I think, you see reports on a daily basis from around the world about match fixing, or, it's also this corruption. And if you just read those out of context, you'd think we'd got a huge problem. But you've got to remember that there are many thousands, if not millions, of sport events taking place across the world, and millions of betting markets. And so I don't think we'll ever know the extent of the problem, but I don't think that it's as sensational and as widespread as the papers would have you believe. And they love to spin a good story. There's something we use in our educational material about misuse of inside information. And it was a football player, Daniel Sturridge, who used misuse inside information to gave information to somebody else to place a bet on a transfer that he was making to another club. And I've seen reports in papers presenting that as Daniel Sturridge has been accused of match fixing. It wasn't anything to do with match fixing at all, but the paper will spin their stories to make it fit their agenda, basically, I think. So I think we're never going to know the true extent, but I don't think it's as sensationalist as perhaps it's been reported in the press.
You know what I think one of the biggest misnomers is, Brett, is the amount of dollars earned by the people participating in these fixes. The media would always make you believe that these are multi-million-dollar scandals, but when we go back and look at them, look at Arizona State, Northwestern, Boston, we have all these examples, even very recent examples, the UFC in November and Alabama very recently. The average amount of dollars earned per game by these athletes fixing the matches is less than $3,000. We're not talking about multi-million-dollar schemes. In a lot of cases, we're talking about athletes that got themselves in a desperate situation with their back against the wall, who just needed a few bucks, and someone was able to take advantage of that desperate situation they were in and get them to do something. But if you just read the media, you would think there's millions and millions of dollars changing hands in each and every one of these scandals. And then when you actually read the criminal complaints, you're like, oh, he made $1,200. Like, the actual amount of dollars earned is never equal to the media and sort of what the representations are.
Yeah. And going back to your point that you made earlier, both of you, about education, education is a vital piece of the puzzle. Absolutely. And one of the things we try to do at Evolve is bring those messages to life. So think about the implications and what are the actual consequences. Think about telling your mum and dad that you've been banned from the sport for betting. So absolutely bring it to life. But it's also about linking it to those key welfare messages as well. So if somebody's got a gambling habit, then we know that makes them more vulnerable to match fixing. So it's raising awareness of that, not only with the participants, but with the wider sports bodies, the coaches, the owners, the physio, whoever, to make sure that everybody's aware of these things. Somebody's been bullied, somebody's been blackmailed. These are all things. So it's raising those key messages as part of that ongoing education to stop these stories and to stop people, ruining their careers at the end of the day.
And I think you both have brought up such good points regarding how this affects the individuals and the very small amounts of money that are involved, because money is so often a huge part of this story. Matthew, when we talk about some of the structural vulnerabilities, particularly in the US, which is still very much a maturing sports betting market, even though sports betting has been here in some shape or form for quite a while, there's a lot of growth of betting markets in the US. And this makes for a lot of new liquidity that didn't necessarily exist before in a regulated market. With what you've seen, not just since 2018 with US Integrity, but also prior to that, when you were with Cantor Gaming and other parts of the sports betting world, do you see this growth of a maturing market introducing new vulnerabilities? Where might we now need risk management, where previously we just thought, yeah, everything's all right?
Well, the more money that's out there, the more money that's being moved around, the more liquidity there is in the marketplace, the more people are going to try to take advantage of it. For example, in 2010/11-ish, when I was at Cantor Gaming and we launched the first regulated mobile sports betting app, the state of Nevada did around $2.5 billion of handle. And at the end of the day, that was basically the US legal sports betting market, $2.5 billion. What we saw is the evolution of the mobile sports betting apps brought that to about $6 billion in the next 8 years by around 2018. In the US last year, there was $108 billion wagered. So we went from $6 billion to $108 billion and are on pace to go do over $150 billion this year. When you start talking about numbers just in one country that are almost $200 billion, that's always going to entice bad actors to try to manipulate those markets and commit fraudulent activity.
And then also to emphasize these numbers, right? They're just the legal market. They're just what we can capture and we can see. There's a broad spectrum of other markets where the numbers aren't necessarily captured by the channels that we're tracking. And thank you. And then Lorraine, from what I'll call the more mature betting perspective, right? You know, we're sort of this, it's crazy to think sometimes of us as this young maturing market because we like to throw our weight around quite a bit as Americans sometimes. But with so much that you've learned and that you know from a more mature market in the UK, where do you see some of the vulnerabilities in the less mature sports and betting relationships? So the US is one of those. There's a currently evolving scene right now in Brazil, for example. Yeah. What lessons can we learn from these more mature markets?
So, you know, we know the fixes are always going to follow the vulnerabilities. You know, that's what they will do. And so it is all about having things in place to protect those vulnerabilities. And, you know, it's getting the right people working together, avoiding organizations working in silos and understand and respect each other's agendas and pool your resources. And, you know, it did take us a while in the UK to get to that point, you know, so people should learn from our mistakes, you know. And I think looking back, I think if we'd have known what we know now, when we first set the national platform up, the Sports Betting Intelligence Unit up back in 2010, I think if we knew what we knew now, we would probably embed it into law enforcement, because that would have made the whole thing, sort of certainly the information sharing and having the priorities to be able to investigate match fixing specifically, that would have been embedded within that unit. So that's certainly one lesson learned. And I know there's a lot of work going on in the US, you know, particularly around monitoring, and Matt's talked about what they do. You know, that's absolutely fantastic. You know, I think the next step is to make sure that those networks are built upon, and that sort of national platform network is established and grown. And so then you're in a good place to plug those vulnerabilities together, and, you know, understanding what each one brings to the party, as it were. You know, and it is about raising awareness of those vulnerabilities across sports, the law enforcement agencies, the betting industry, the regulator, you know, and this is all absolutely key. And it's very easy for me to sit here and say this, but, you know, it seems to be like a simple thing that we need, that, you know, as Matt said, with the whole collaboration thing. But in practice, it can take some time.
Yeah, and one of the things we need is consistencies amongst the law, so that there's prosecutable laws that these law enforcement agencies can utilize. I thought Lorraine brought it up great earlier when she said in the UK, they don't have match fixing laws. And we run into that in many of the states here, where we'll catch people participating in match fixing, and then law enforcement goes, well, where do we prosecute them? Because we don't have a direct match fixing law. So then they have to find other laws, fraud, or, tampering with government docs, or whatever it might be, in order to prosecute these folks. If we could get some consistencies amongst the regulation and the actual laws, it would make enforcement and prosecution easier. And then I think the process would run a little smoother.
Yeah. And I think building on that, another problem, certainly in the UK, and I'm assuming it's going to be the same in America, is identifying where the offence takes place, because you've got bettors in one place, the match is somewhere else, and the betting's taking place all over the world in some instances. So where is the offence taking place? And in the UK, even if it was a wholly UK-centric case, we have 42, I think, regional forces. So finding, and they've all got their own priorities to deal with as well. So finding somebody to take that on is another area where some consistency would be better. But, it is what it is at the moment. Make the most of it, I guess, is the key message.
And I think that's such a core point, right? That these laws aren't necessarily written to identify this core piece of the puzzle, whether that's match fixing or other kind of forms of fraudulent behavior that might be associated with it. And, Lorraine, I'll turn this one to you. What are some of the other kind of regulatory enforcement practices that overlap with these sorts of things? What are these other forms of criminality that might be pursued? Matt named a couple, right? What are some of these fraudulent behaviors, looking at misuse of government documents, for example? What other ways are criminality, or what other ways rather is criminality overlapping with some of these other betting integrity forms, right?
Yeah. So one of the practices that seems to be on the rise within organised crime groups is obtaining people's IDs and using them to open betting accounts. And the reason they do this is they want to spread the bets around lots of different accounts to avoid spikes in the market, to avoid the suspicious betting indicators rising to the surface. So if you've got a few people betting big amounts on a market, it can raise suspicion. If you've got hundreds of people or placing small bets, it looks more natural, it flies under the radar. And organised crime are obtaining these IDs, real identities, by either stealing them through identity theft or paying people to sell them their details. So we've seen it with students who want to make some money, or people perhaps on benefits who are struggling to pay the bills or whatever. So they get access to personal details of real individuals, so they can use a valid identity to pass the operator verification checks and open betting accounts, often without sometimes people don't even know their accounts have been taken and that they're betting on these accounts. And because the betting accounts look like they belong to lots of different people, we call it smurfing in the UK. It looks like there's lots of separate people, but they're actually all being controlled by one person or a group of people. And this is an MO. It's not just Evolve that are sort of saying this is something that we're seeing. It's been referenced in public reports like from the United Nations and Interpol as key methods that are being used now to infiltrate sports betting markets.
And I think one of my hopes is that we start to see the regulated sports betting market laws and rules start to mirror or look very similar to the financial service laws and rules. When we think about the financial service market compared to the sports betting market, we use all the same terms: traders, risk managers, liquidity. It's almost all the same stuff that we talk about. You're risking money to either make more money or lose money. They're very similar. But what we see in the stock market case, look at Martha Stewart went to jail. I mean, Martha Stewart for insider trading, but yet somehow the same exact reference, the misuse of insider information on the regulated sports betting side, we don't know what to do or how to prosecute it. But there's very clear and precise laws on the financial services side. How do we deal with match fixing, fraudulent activity? The fact that they've been able to take the stock market and develop such clear and concise laws and regulations around it, and we haven't been able to on the regulated gaming side yet, is really frustrating, especially since those two markets emulate themselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah. These are fantastic points. I mean, a lot of this speaks, right, Matthew, when you talk about these parallels, right, it speaks to kind of a lack of evolution of the space into present day. And Lorraine, a lot of what you've talked about, right, is the way that we're now using some of these newer technologies. We live in a digital world now. We are doing this panel on Zoom and recording it to be played later. So this has really advanced a lot of information as well as a lot of how we process that information. And here I'm going to look once again to the future and one of the most popular buzzwords of 2023, which is, of course, artificial intelligence and AI, right? It's been such a huge buzzword, particularly since it exploded into the public eye when ChatGPT hit the scene for the masses late last year. And Matt, I'm going to turn to you first on this one. You know, how can AI be used for good and not so good when it comes to betting integrity?
I think AI is really going to play a major role. I think we're just starting to dip our toes into it a little bit now. Again, we've always tried to be technology and data focused first. Let's get as much information as we can. I think that the US integrity system emulates the European integrity system in a lot of ways, except we try to add more front-end alerting from the integrity monitors. We were so dependent on operators to report for so long. But again, to Lorraine's point, if we see 200 accounts making small bets, each operator is likely to think those are normal bets. But if we can have a system that detects those in real time that says, hey, 200 bets of the exact same amount of $500 came in 15-second window, we know that's actually suspicious. We know it's abnormal. We know it should be looked into. But each one of those operators individually says, oh, that bet's not suspicious. Well, if I told you there were 200 identical ones in a 20-second window, would you think so? Of course. So I think we need to continue to move forward with the amount of information we can get, how we process that information. And with so many sets of rules around individual player props and prohibitions on colleges in some states, using AI to factor in where bets are placed, the timing of those bets being placed, and the deeming of them being abnormal or normal means we can identify with better precision which ones are abnormal, get them in the hands of analysts who can dig deeper right away, and spend less time on the false positives, because let's face it, there's a lot of them. Hey, this could be suspicious. Someone looks into it and oh, it really wasn't. But using AI, I think we could build better models. We can have more use cases of all the data and information we have, do a better job of precisely pinpointing those abnormalities that really do have some validity to be investigated, and get them in the hands of those investigative folks faster.
Yeah, I can't really add to that. I agree with everything you've said. If you read the media, you think that AI is going to be the end of the world for us all. It's really bad, but there are some fantastic ways it's been used in medicine, for example, already. So why not? Why can't we harness that in the sort of betting integrity arena? I'm sure there's some good that can be, I'm positive there's some good that can be done.
I feel like the downside to doing this as a recording on Zoom is that I can't really stand up and applaud after you've been through these parts of the discussion, but very well said. I mean, that there's such an incredible amount of opportunity within some of the risks that we see, as well as we've discussed for the last 55 minutes or so, risks that may be associated with opportunity. So with this in mind, let's focus toward kind of the end here. So I'm going to think about a bit of a devil's advocate here. So why should we care about betting integrity? It seems like there should be a simple solution. Let's just ban gambling, and wouldn't that be a solution, right? We'd be done with it. What is that? Is that not the solution? I mean, when we think about this, if something doesn't exist, then of course we wouldn't have that same issue.
Well, I think when used responsibly, sports betting is the greatest engagement tool that we've ever had in the world of sports ecosystem, the sports business ecosystem, which is tickets, merchandise, people watching and viewing these games through the different streaming or television packages. So, and for the vast majority of folks, they do it responsibly. And there's so many studies out there that show people that have a bet on a match, regardless of the size of the bet, as low as $5, are 12 to 15 times more likely to watch that match than someone who doesn't have a bet. So we know it's this wonderful engagement tool to bring people in, to get them engaged with sport. We have to prevent the irresponsible, the illicit, the nefarious from happening. And that's why it's so important at the end of the day that we continue to strive to have better collaboration, better information sharing, because it is so important and it does taint it. And just say this out loud and picture it in your mind. A few years ago, the president of La Liga, Spain's equivalent of the NFL, their number one Premier League, came out and said 8 to 10 of our matches this year will be fixed. Imagine Roger Goodell or Adam Silver or one of the major commissioners of US sport or other sports around the world coming out and saying 8 to 10 NFL matches will be fixed this year, and Americans going, oh, okay, that's not too bad. Nobody wants that. We want that number to be zero. Now, maybe we can't ever get to that number to be zero, but that's what we all strive for that number to be. And if we all believe that we're striving for that number to be zero, then we feel good that the games we're watching are on the up and up because people are trying to make that number zero. The second we stop striving to make that number zero, I think suddenly the whole evolution of sport and the ecosystem falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, I echo everything there. You could ban betting, but all you're going to do is drive the markets underground. That's fact. And I think, like Matt said, I think you got to remember that a lot of people enjoy gambling, and it brings a lot of benefits, and it can be enjoyed safely by a lot of people. We just need to make it safer. That's the big thing.
These are, of course, excellent points. Now, as we close out, let me ask you one more question. Because, of course, we want people to get more involved in this, to be more involved in the integrity of the game, to maintain these safer spaces, as Lorraine talked about. We don't want, for example, as Matt described, to have the presidents of certain leagues to stand up and say, well, we expect several of the games to be fixed this year. So to encourage people to get more into this space, of course, we have to learn, right? We need that education. So what's something that when you were first getting into this field, what do you wish you had known earlier? And what kind of inspired you to continue moving into it?
So I have actually spent my entire post-collegiate career in regulated sports betting. And I think like anyone, when you spend your entire career in one industry and you're passionate about that industry, you genuinely come to love and care about that industry. So I want this industry to thrive. It's good for my company. It's good for the industry as a whole. It's good for everybody. So at the end of the day, we do strive to make things better. What I wish I would have known ahead of time of just how fragmented it was. I always thought, boy, everybody's on the same page in terms of stopping match fixing. And to Lorraine's point, collaboration sounds great, but isn't easy. You have to understand all the sportsbook operators have agendas toward profitability, and they're busy. They're trying to launch in 5 different jurisdictions with 5 different sets of rules. And you're asking them to share all this information, collaborate with you. But to them, it's a hindrance, right? They're trying to do 100 other things, and they want to prioritize some of your goals. I think that the idea of bringing everyone together in a collaborative means has been a lot bigger challenge than I've seen. But to the credit of everyone in the industry over here in North America, at least what I've seen over the last probably 12 to 18 months, is we have seen a greater commitment to education, integrity than we have ever seen over here in the very brief, we'll call it 5-year since PASPA got repealed history. But boy, it's a challenge. It's easy to say that we'll all just collaborate, communicate, and cooperate, but it doesn't always just simply happen. And competing agendas are really, really difficult. And regulatory change takes time. We have to remember that most of these legislative sessions only meet once every other year. So you're talking about, yeah, I have this great idea now, but the earliest it could be implemented is 2 years down the road. And then people have to vote on it. And then there's the idea of implementation. So all of these changes take years, but we always want them now. We feel like, oh, this is such a great idea, let's just do it. But nothing just happens. So I think we have to be patient, we have to be collaborative, and have to work together for the betterment of the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I've written down sort of this prep for this. I wish I'd have known how hard it was going to be to get people to collaborate. It's the same thing. Once you've got it going, it's and you get a result, it's absolutely brilliant. But getting there, even we sort of in my time, we've had organisations accusing each other of purposely withholding information, not sharing it. And it's like, but we can't share it because we've got data protection in place. So, you know, we need to work together to use that legislation in the best way possible. So it's not looking for the barriers, it's looking for the benefits and the ways to work together and overcome those challenges. You know, and it's not just us that are saying this. You know, we've worked with Interpol, the IOC, the Council of Europe, the UN. They're all saying the same thing. You've got to collaborate together. You know, so you know, it's right up there. We all understand that it needs to be done. We just need to work out the best way to do it.
Well, a huge thank you to both of our panelists here, Lorraine Pearman and Matthew Holt. A huge thank you to those who are tuning in during SIGA Sport Integrity Week. I know that there's been a lot of information thrown at you over the last hour. If you have any questions, please reach out to us at UNLV International Gaming Institute, at Evolve Sport Integrity, at US Integrity. We're here to answer these sorts of questions and really come to a space where we have so much better of a place, at a world of sports and sports betting full of integrity. So thank you all very much and have a wonderful week.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Lorraine.
Bye.
Well, welcome everyone. It's good to have you here. It's good to be back in Sport Integrity Week. And it's coming at quite an auspicious moment. I say that because there is such dynamic discussion about responsible gaming, specifically integrity more broadly, around the world right now. Here in the United States, we've just kicked off Responsible Gaming Education Month, which until last year had only been a week. Now we're spending a month on it. One of these days, going to be responsible gaming every day, 24/7. But for the moment, we're focused on it now, just as we are this week on sport integrity. And so today I thought we might explore the intersection of these two things, how sport integrity is actually enhanced by responsible gaming efforts, how it is strengthened by responsible gaming efforts, and ultimately how we protect players from any of the harms that might otherwise come. But at the same time, as we think about the broader issues, how do we protect leagues? How do we protect teams? How do we protect entire communities? So I think that there's a lot of crossover in these topics, and that's what we're going to explore today. I want to very briefly introduce my panel mates, although I'm doing this with a couple of sentences. All three of you, we could spend a lot of time talking about your backgrounds. So to the extent I've left anything out as we begin to talk, please do feel free to add the things that I've missed. First up is Matt Zarb-Cousin. Matt is co-founder of Gamban. He campaigned successfully for reform to fix odds betting terminals and has held high-profile positions in politics and social issue campaigns. Gamban is, just in case there's anyone who's not aware of it, Gamban is pretty remarkable technology that blocks websites at the control of the individuals, at the control of the players. So it's obviously there to support them in making, not just making better decisions, but not getting lost in sort of finding sports betting, which these days seems to be quite easy to do. Martin Bland directs the international growth of Epic Risk Management, which is a consulting and advisory firm working to minimize the harm caused by gambling addiction. Part of Epic's mission statement actually is to protect business, to protect employees, to protect customers. So sort of this holistic notion that responsible gaming isn't only about the player, responsible gaming really affects the entire ecosystem. Epic combines firsthand experience of gambling-related harm with expert advice on how it can be prevented. And last, but certainly not least, our hostess for this week, Katie Simmons. who is a well-known lawyer specializing in sports law, who is serving as the Global Chief Operating Officer at Sports Integrity Global Alliance, and is also the Managing Director of SIGA Women. Katie co-founded SIGA, which is the world's largest coalition for sport integrity. So welcome all of you. I wanted to just start with kind of a general overview question and get any of you to, or hopefully all of you, to respond. But one of the distinctions between us, the three of you are in Europe, and Katie, in your case, around the world. I'm just here in the United States. My blinders go on at the at the coastline. You all, depending on what country you're working in, you've got a lot more experience at this than we do. We're kind of newcomers. So I'm just curious that a lot of reforms have already been put into place. Which ones are working? Because the research we're seeing doesn't seem to indicate the public is jumping at the opportunity to become more responsible. So what's working, and if you're willing, what's not working?
I'll jump in there. Hi, everybody. Happy Sport Integrity Week. I'm the hostess of the mostess, I would say. So thanks for that introduction, Alan. And thank you. We're delighted for UNLV to be one of our hosting partners, and even more thrilled to share the floor with Gamban and Epic Risk Management, who are our SIGA members here today. I would say that what is working is that the regulation of the sports betting globally. We've got the repeal of PASPA, and also I'm actually speaking to you today from Sao Paulo. Brazil is another jurisdiction where regulation is happening, because no one wants sports betting to happen in a dark space. Regulation is welcome, and that has been successful. However, where we have, and particularly in the US scene, that the repeal of PASPA has seen a plethora of new commercial opportunities with sports betting boom, lots of sponsorship deals. So I'd say the reforms, they're lining people's and organizations' pockets, are commercially and financially the interests of those involved, the states, the leagues, the sports betting operators. They are having a successful driving force on the financial gain. But I would say that, from our experience, little attention has actually been given to safeguarding integrity. And those who thought that they were immune to the match fixings and the sports betting related scandals are actually painfully waking up to the reality. And I'm sure that Epic and Gamban's experiences will sort of agree with this. But also statistically, we've got the FBI investigations voicing concerns in the Congress at the US sports betting market. And so what we are seeing at SIGA is that regulation's good. With it, though, you must, put integrity into the forefront, as integrity, and cash need to be king together. If integrity continues to be the poor relation to financial gain, ultimately there will be fewer financial returns overall. Sponsors that invest cannot be left unprotected when it comes to reputational risk, and fans' trust will erode. The unpredictable nature of sports make it attractive to fans, and they need to trust that what they see on the pitch, in the stadium, is real, is authentic, and not manipulated. So without trust, you cannot create value. And I think that has been missing from the reforms, the trust, safeguarding the trust, and ensuring that the value, the short-term value, is sustained over a long-term period. But I'd love to hear from Martin, to jump in.
Of course, thank you. Happy to, and thanks for your very kind words, Alan, and thank you, Katie, and thank you, SIGA, for the opportunity to speak today. Look, I think I'll start with the old adage of any individual anywhere in the world that is placing a sports bet, and they place that sports bet with a licensed operator on a sport that is governed in a regulated market. That individual has a fundamental right to expect that bet was placed in a very fair and honest and transparent way. It was placed in a safe and controlled environment, and it was placed without corruption or outside influence. And that, to me, is sports betting integrity. We have to ensure as stakeholders within that space, we have to ensure that every single bet placed anywhere in the world has those things. So what reforms have contributed to that being successful, and what haven't? I would say that significant investment is required in order to make this successful, but also very effective collaboration across the key stakeholders within the industry is required. That's the sporting governing bodies, the sports teams and leagues, the sports betting operators and their regulators. It might also include law enforcement and governmental bodies, but it absolutely requires the input and the involvement from third-party organisations that are experts in their field and specialise in providing services that help the stakeholders achieve these aims. And this, to me, is really where organisations like Gamban, like SIGA, and like Epic can play a fundamental role in the success of that. And I actually think the reforms that we've seen across the last few years and the growth of organisations like ours, that has made a very positive impact on the industry. You have a lot of sports integrity organisations out there now. You have US Integrity, USI in the US. There's IBIA. The UK Gambling Commission has its Sports Betting Integrity Unit, the SBIU. And these are all positive moves in the industry that these organisations are now becoming more accessible. I would, of course, also put SIGA in that sphere. SIGA is an organisation that not only champions sports integrity, which helps to keep the conversation at the forefront of the industry, but it also certifies and holds sporting bodies accountable for universal sports integrity standards. So I think that's worked very, very well. I think the industry enabling third-party organisations to come in and support the development and amendment to rules and regulations and making sure that governance is implemented correctly, I think that's been a very, very positive thing. What hasn't worked as well? Well, I think the industry remains very reactive. There's been a plethora of organisations over I would say at least the last 10 years. And by the way, this is a positive thing, that now collect millions and millions upon millions of data points live and in-game that allow organisations and stakeholders to monitor and detect and identify suspicious betting activity. And that's a good thing for the industry. But what we tend to be doing, we've set up to react to that. We've set the industry up in order to identify where the problems are. And then how do we deal with those problems? We've almost accepted that these problems are going to happen. So how do we identify and react to it? I don't think reforms have really addressed prevention. I think a lot more work and a lot more reform goes into how we actually prevent sports betting integrity breaches. I would say that where there is too much emphasis on the rules and regulations, there is a danger that the sports organisations can be complacent, by which I mean, of course, we need rules and regulations, but there's often this misguided belief that where there is a rule, it means that people in a sports organisation, whether that be the athlete or whether it be the front office staff, that they will not partake in prohibited activity because there's a rule preventing them from doing that. I have had professional organisations say to me, we don't have a problem with sports betting in our organisation because our people are aware of the rules and they are aware of the consequences. And therefore, reforms really need to guard against that complacency. And I don't think that is done to the best level just yet. And the final thing I would say is, and actually this hopefully is a segue into Matt's experience, is that I don't think reforms have really addressed our deep enough understanding of gambling addiction. I don't think there's enough research and data out there that actually explores the dynamic of why an individual would break the rules. You know, within the sporting environment now, and the exponential growth of sports betting, more and more people, both on-field staff, the athletes, and off-field staff, are exposed to more gambling messages, more gambling products. And have we really understood their vulnerabilities? And have we really understood their relationship with gambling? And I'm not sure we have. And that requires research, that requires data. And therefore, any reforms within the industry really need to address that as well. So a deeper understanding of actually what gambling addiction is and why it is caused and the dynamics of it.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think when obviously PASPA was repealed in the US, and we've had that huge influx now of sports betting and the legalization across the states, I think that the experience in the US obviously has, when you legalize gambling and online gambling, and you allow the promotion of it, then you are effectively, because of its links to sport and because sports betting is the first thing to have been permitted, you're effectively turning athletes into promoters of gambling companies. And in that environment, I think it's somewhat inevitable that you're going to see an increase in sports integrity breaches or issues, and people breaking the rules because they're surrounded by gambling incentives to gamble. They're being paid very often in the UK, for example, in the Premier League. They're being paid to promote certain gambling companies, the partners of which are Premier League clubs. So in that context, we've seen obviously a lot of footballers here in Britain breaking the rules. And there was the Ivan Toney case, but there's likely to be very many more. And I think that, exactly as Martin says, we don't fully understand the impact of the constant over-promotion of gambling on athletes themselves. We are coming to the realization that if you look at some of the surveys in the UK around support for gambling sponsorship, it's very, very against, even among football fans who can see that gambling money coming into football is going towards the running of the club and perhaps buying new players and all that sort of stuff. The fans are still majority against gambling advertising in the sport. And I think there's a realization that this is a commercial model that, yes, effectively uses sport to promote to fans, to get new customers. And invariably there will be a not insignificant quantity of harm that arises from that promotion. So you have this kind of weird relationship between the clubs and the fans, where they're promoting something to their fans, where some of them, they're loyal fans, some of them will actually experience a great deal of harm. So there's the safeguarding issue around the athletes. There's the safeguarding issue around the fans. Do the fans know where to go? Is there support available if they get addicted to gambling? Is it appropriate to even promote gambling to the level that we are promoting? I think all of these things are legitimate questions. And the impact on sports integrity, I think, is twofold. Firstly, you've got the athlete who may get addicted to gambling and therefore be more vulnerable to match fixing, to betting on actions where they can influence that directly within a match. And you've got the fans as well, who are able to bet on so many different things, so many different types of bet that frankly are quite easy to fix. There's lots of things that are very easy to fix. And when you've got a lack of, particularly in the UK context, you've got a lack of control from the sports governing body, from the Premier League, of the data, and therefore the bets which operators are allowed to offer on the sport. If they can't control that, then invariably you're going to have this situation where you've got lots of these bets available to fans, to people who are watching the game, that are easy to fix. So can those people trying to fix the game work with that player to do a particular action in the game? So all of these things, I think, make sports more vulnerable to match fixing, to integrity issues. But that doesn't mean you have to necessarily ban gambling on sports. It's not, there are ways in which you can structure regulations. I think you've got to give sports governing bodies absolutely will play a pivotal role in reduction of integrity issues. It's obviously in their interest to do so, and as long as they understand that they have to control the data, they have to be able to control what bets are allowed to be taken on their sport. In fact, what they should be doing is licensing the right to do that. And I think there is examples in France of where the sports governing body in football has done the same thing. So gambling funding gets into sport, but not in return for marketing, for example. So I think all of these things, ensuring that sports governing bodies have that lever, have that control where they can, if the particular types of wages are higher risk, that they can basically say that that's not allowed?
Just to jump in as well, is that obviously you expect it to be the government to legislate, but actually some of the sports organisations have actually put in place their own reforms. The Premier League, for instance, banning the shirt sponsors on the front of the shirt from gambling operators, which is huge. And obviously, that is, the US, they're not doing that at the moment. It's open. Same in Brazil. But I think that decision was probably one of the key reforms, but that's come from a league rather than than the government.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating. In the US, the debate about sports betting really started with integrity. The leagues all lined up and said, we need to maintain the integrity of the sport, and therefore we need to have I'm going to be colloquial here. We need to have a cut of the action in order to have the monies to maintain the integrity of the sport. And as you've all noted, the leagues, I think, have now come to a realization that the idea of protecting integrity is far more complex, far more dynamic, and far more multifaceted. And so I wanted to use that to get to a question. I think it was last week, maybe the week before, there was a PGA player who complained in the media about the fact that the people who were at a PGA event were being much more vocal about, shouting at players relative to their performance, clearly as a result of their bet, and in some cases being very specific. I've got 500 on you that says you're going to make the putt. And I'm just wondering to what extent we're seeing that kind of behavior elsewhere in the world, and to what extent, there's a level of potential to erode integrity in the environment at a sporting event. And having just gone to one of my first ever European football matches a few months ago, that environment was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. I honestly don't know that I've seen anything quite like that. And, if that's about to change permanently, I think, to my mind, that's an integrity issue. And I'm just curious if any or all of you have either heard stories of this, of the kind of the changing nature between attendee at a sporting event and the athletes.
I think if I may, I read the article as well regarding the PGA situation, and there's an element of idiosyncrasies with golf, right, whereby the fans actually can get closer to the professional athletes than in most sports, and also the dynamic of golf, where the golf swing can be interrupted by the smallest of factors, whereby I think, certainly in the UK, outside of golf, I would say I've not heard of this type of incident happening. And I think most of the team-based sports we have in the UK, the athletes will be very used to large chants and loud noises to try and put them off from scoring a penalty or scoring a goal. But it nevertheless highlights a very, very important factor. And it's actually an area of reform that Epic tries to work in, which is, how do we educate the fans? Is sports integrity exclusive to elite sports people and elite sports organizations? Or should it be a tool in which you go through the professional sports organizations to ensure that the fans and the communities which those sports organizations serve also receive the benefit of that education? Now, will that guarantee that those types of incidents, as occurred in golf, won't happen? It probably won't. But what it does do is it at least shows that the sporting bodies are working with their consumers, and they're working with their fans to ensure that they receive the benefit of the education that they get. That too much we consider sports integrity and the investment in sports integrity to be just mainstream sports. What about grassroots sports? What about youth sports? What about amateur sports? And there's even probably, I would throw into that mix, some more unrepresented sports like female sports and adapted sports or Paralympian sports. These, if you like, less mainstream sports, do they benefit from the same level of investment and the same level of education as Premier League football or National Football League in the US, et cetera, et cetera? So I think it was a fascinating article from the golfer. We at Epic, we actually do work with the DP Tour in Europe, and as I say, it's a very different dynamic within that game. But as I say, I think it raises a very, very important dynamic with respect to how we interact with fans of the game, and not just with athletes and people working within the professional sport itself.
Here in Las Vegas, we now have several professional teams, and it's been really noticeable where, late in a game that would otherwise the outcome is already determined, but all of a sudden there's a goal or a touchdown or a basket, and the place erupts like this is going to change the outcome. It has nothing to do with the outcome. What's obviously happened is a player has gone above their, what the line that was set on them to score, or the team, the differential, the point differential has been made or taken away. And so the people who are wagering on these things get very loud, and it's kind of an accepted thing in Las Vegas, right? Because we've had sports betting for years and years and years. And so we know what that sounds like. But again, it makes me wonder about, well, what is the socialization of integrity around the world? How do we interpret that in terms of the game experience and how people consume the games? Is that going to change?
Yeah, I think it's more noticeable actually in soccer, in European football, because of how passionate the fans are. So already you've got a very, very engaged audience, a crowd, who really, really want to get behind the teams, and in a very adversarial environment, which is probably what you experience. And I think that what you've noticed now is, I think betting on the sport has had this influence, is lots of people reducing the game to different data points and to a set of kind of individual actions. And that's a shame. It's just a shame. It's not really the spirit of the game. And I think that's why I think it's most noticeable in football. But yeah, I mean, I think the more people start viewing sport through that lens of, data and actions and different types of bets and all that sort of stuff, the more it will eat itself. The thing that initially made it perhaps an attractive proposition for the betting industry, because of the passion that fans have and they want to get behind the team and all that sort of stuff. If that passion goes, because in place of that comes, a betting and a betting culture that replaces a fan culture, then I think that that won't be good for anyone. It won't be good for the betting industry. It won't be good for sport. So I think there has to be an element of control to preserve what sport is. And I think that's what you're sort of getting at, really. It's like, we don't want sport to just become a random series of betting opportunities.
I don't know if you saw today, Matt, in the UK newspapers, and you may or may not have seen this, Alan, but there were calls by the FA, the Football Association in the UK, to ban being able to bet on yellow cards in football. So in soccer in the UK, that's a new article that came out today. And it's interesting because it talks to this idea that, is your passion for the sport lots of little individual events that happen in that sport, or is it the result of the game? Is it that your team wins or loses, or is it that you bet correctly that there were going to be 5 yellow cards? Which again is I think is to the point you're making, Alan. It's just an interesting dynamic that we now have here, because of all the data points that are available.
And that's a prime example of something that's easy to fix. If you're a player, one takes one player just to put a bad challenge in, and they get booked.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it actually makes the betting a sport in itself, doesn't it? It becomes a sport that unites, a single sport. But and obviously in cricket is also another example of a sport where it can be broken down into so many different ways, the bets. It would be a shame to erode, because my enjoyment from a personal perspective is the whole game.
Yeah, totally agree. Each of you have products or programs that are designed to reduce harm from problem gambling, a term that I use incredibly hesitantly because it means 7 different things to any 5 people you ask about it. But I wonder if you could give us an overview of some of those programs and products, and what are some of the newest, what's on the leading edge right now in terms of efforts to reduce harms.
I'm happy to go first. So I'm a co-founder of Gamban, which is blocking software that people can download onto their devices, and it blocks access to gambling sites and apps. And we try to make it as difficult to remove as various operating systems will allow. So for the duration of the license, for whatever duration the user selects, whether that's a month, a year, that protection will remain on their devices. And what we've seen is it's having a very positive effect on recovery, on cessation, and when used in conjunction, in particular with other tools such as self-exclusion. And in the UK, we have bank transaction blocking. If you layer up protection, then it makes it very, very difficult to gamble, and therefore you're more likely to enter treatment, complete treatment, you're more likely to recover from addiction. So it's free in the UK through the National Gambling Helpline. It's also free in Norway, in Finland, and in Ohio now through the Time Out Ohio platform. So we're just trying to ensure that it's available free at the point of use for as many people as possible as would need it. And we want to try to ensure that the sports governing bodies and those involved in the leagues understand what's available for people if they get addicted, whether they're athletes or fans.
Happy to go. Just before I give an insight into Epic's programs, but what I would say is I'll just refer back to an early point that I made, which is towards effective sports integrity solutions, sports betting integrity solutions require effective collaboration. The market, I said it's positive that we have a lot of organizations out there that are specialists in their field and that they're much needed within the industry, but it's very, very important that organizations come together and work together in order to create this 360-degree solution whereby we create an environment of safer gambling and sports integrity. And that's ultimately what Gamban and SIGA and Epic are trying to achieve here, whereby we're bringing different aspects of programs and services to create that holistic offering, to ensure that multiple different stakeholders within the industry benefit from that. So with that, the role that Epic plays really is that the heart of our business is prevention. So Epic doesn't provide any level of monitoring, and it doesn't provide any level of treatment or recovery. It's purely an organization that's based on providing consultancy and educational services that are all centered around prevention. We're trying to stop the issues happening. We're not reacting to those issues. And the way that we do that really is in 3 main ways. It's that we raise awareness and we educate and we evaluate the results of that. So raising awareness really is about us talking to the risks that exist for sporting bodies. First and foremost of that is the human damage that can be caused. We're primarily a business that is operated to try and prevent human harm, and the devastating impact that gambling addiction can have on individuals, can have on their careers, can have on their lives, and can have on the lives around those individuals. So we're very, very much about raising awareness of the damage that can be caused on a human level. And the other things we talk to within our programs are the performance damage that can be caused to sporting organizations. If you have individuals in your organization, whether it be one of your athletes or whether it be your off-field staff, those individuals become distracted, they become disengaged, they become disruptive, and ultimately they are not performing at full capacity. And therefore, the result of that is that your organization, whether that be a league, whether that be a body, whether that be a team, your organization is not performing as well as it could be as well. So there's damage to be had there. The third element is reputational damage. So a lot of our programs are centered around protecting your reputation. The reality is that betting scandals within a sporting body could result in a PR catastrophe for that brand and for that organization. And all them three things really lead into the fourth element of this, which is financial damage. Lack of shareholder confidence, fans turning away from your brand because they don't trust you or they don't see that you're performing very well. Many, many different aspects of this would impact a sporting organisation's financial success. So we raise awareness around all those things, and then we provide education through lived experience, ex-professionals, and for the purposes of just explaining that terminology, lived experience, which I'm sure not everyone is familiar with, but lived experience to us essentially is an individual who has lived through their own experience of gambling harm or gambling addiction. It's an individual who has had a real life experience of that. So though those individuals, really, there's no one better to speak to the damage on that person and the people around them and their employers, indeed, in this case being a sporting organisation. And we also use ex-professionals, so either ex-professional athletes or ex-professionals from the sporting industry, again, who have all gone through their own personal experience of gambling harm. So the workshops and the programs are about introducing people to a real-life example of that situation and the damage it can cause. And then I mentioned evaluation, which is the third element, essentially, of the programs that EPIC offers, which is about collecting data on the relationship that the individuals who we speak to have with gambling. So we try to uncover, how often do people in a sporting organisation gamble? How exposed are they to gambling products and gambling messages? What effect does that have on them? And we try to really upskill those individuals and then measure the result of the workshops that we've delivered on their ability to not only identify gambling harm in themselves and the people around them, but to be able to have conversations with those individuals. As I'm sure Matt will concur, half of the battle is being able to have the right conversations at the right time in order to implement effective intervention. It's not just identifying and then punishing someone. It's about having the right conversation to be able to prevent that individual on this journey towards gambling addiction. So they're really the three services that EPIC offers. And as I say, we are very much supportive and excited to be collaborating with other organisations in this space to create an environment in which we can ultimately create that effective sports betting integrity solution.
Well, you said it, Martin. You used the word sport integrity. We'll go back to the acronym SIGA and SIGA Solutions, because SIGA as a platform is designed to be multi-stakeholder and to work in partnership with our members that are the lifeblood of our organisation. The members fund SIGA so that it's equitable and we're not rely on one donation, and that's very important from an independence perspective. But we are reform driven. We're not a think tank. That drives me crazy when people say that. We're an action tank, and we want everybody to be part of the reform. SIGA can't do it alone. The governments can't do it alone, and the sports organisations can't do it alone. So it's about bringing global business, sports organisations, governments together in this multi-stakeholder platform and to all push for integrity. And how they can push for integrity is through our set of universal standards on sport integrity. We don't deal with doping. We leave that to the World Anti-Doping Agency. Thank goodness for that. But we do have 4 target areas. They're on good governance in sport, how the sports organisations are run, financial integrity and transparency, the money flows through the sport, sports betting integrity, and youth development and protection. And the sports betting integrity universal standards are unique in that they are the only standards that have 4 recipients, because we can't just address it with one stakeholder group. Otherwise, it will leave it open to vulnerabilities. So we have standards for the sports organisations. We have standards for the operators, the regulators, and the governments, because it's only by drawing all together can we affect the reform. And obviously, the standards and our membership, we are recognising not only our global galvanising power, but also some of the very good sport integrity solutions that our members are offering, and hence the collaboration with Gamban, with Epic Risk Management, to come up with the first ever SIGA solution product. It will be leveraging Epic's fantastic training and education programs, and also Gamban's innovative software blocking system, and harnessing that together to deliver that globally and deploy that around the world. We see huge demands. It's not just the sports organizations, as Martin referred to. It is the sponsors whose reputations could be at risk that may want to put this in place to protect the sports properties. It is for the governments as well, who have very concerned, quite rightly so, in terms of their population facing gambling issues. So we are excited to market this. We'll be launching it officially very soon, but we're giving a sneak peek during the UNLV's webinar during Sport Integrity Week, and the product will be called Sports Guard.
Outstanding. You know, I was thinking as I was listening to all of you about a class I took several years ago. And in the book for the class, there was a chapter, I don't know that it was entitled "The Question You Should Never Answer," but that's really what it was. It made the point that anytime someone says to you, "What's the one thing?" Right there, you don't even need to know what the rest of the sentence is. What's the one? So I'm going to use it here. What's the one thing that we need to do to protect sport integrity? Don't answer the question. There is no answer to the question. There is no one thing. And as I hear you talking about collaboration and coming at this from different points of view, Martin, you made a very articulate distinction between prevention and treatment, and focusing on things like awareness and education. We tend to define in the responsible gaming community the pillars as being education, awareness, research, treatment, and prevention. All of it. There isn't one thing. It's all of it. So I have to tell you, Kate, I'm really excited to hear the idea that there is going to be this solution that is going to incorporate the wonderful work that both Epic and Gamban have been doing, and wrap it all together. It's exactly the kind of collaboration I think, Martin, that you've been referring to, and I think it can only be for the better of the entire industry. It seems to me, and I'm sorry, I'm sort of processing some of the things you've said earlier, and Matt, I think you may have been the one who talked about the industry being reactive. So let me just first and foremost completely endorse that. The industry has been almost entirely reactive on a lot of topics. But one of the areas that I'm not certain that the industry, or even frankly the leagues, have completely understood is the very symbiotic relationship between responsible gaming and integrity. These two things are part and parcel of the same concepts. And I'm curious to get anyone's thoughts about, first off, feel free to disagree. That's okay. But what is happening that is beginning, are we beginning to see a greater confluence of these topics? And especially because of the work that the three of you are doing.
Yeah, I mean, from our standpoint, I mean, they are obviously very closely connected. Responsible gambling and sports integrity are, part of the same ecosystem. I mean, they are actually different things, as everyone on this call knows. I mean, we at Epic would not say we're a sports integrity organization. We would say we're a safer gambling organization. However, we are part of that ecosystem because we strongly believe, and there's evidence to suggest that it's stronger than a belief, that individuals who are developing gambling harm, and especially individuals that work in sporting organizations, and even more especially the individuals who are on the field of play and can affect the passage of play. If those individuals are developing out of control gambling, then they absolutely represent a higher risk to sport integrity breaches than people who are not. That doesn't mean that people who are not developing gambling addiction and can't potentially be a sports integrity breach. Of course they can, but it's higher risk for an individual that is. That is for certain. And therefore, the role that Epic plays, and again, within the SIGA solutions ecosystem, is not one to monitor and then react to an issue as it comes up. It's actually to play that part of how do we prevent that happening in the first place? How do we prevent an individual from developing out of control gambling? That's the safer gambling element of this ecosystem, because if you can prevent that, then you will drastically mitigate that risk of a sports integrity breach. It will come hugely down that's likely to happen. So there's often a danger, and we've had it said to us from the sporting organisations that we work with that, well, we don't need safer gambling education because we've got sports integrity, or we don't need sports integrity because we've got safer gambling education. They work hand in hand. They should work hand in hand seamlessly. But to us, they are two different disciplines that, if you want to achieve the highest standards of sports integrity, you need to implement both. It's not good enough for a league to ever say, well, we don't need the other because we've got one of them. That they've got to come hand in hand, in my mind.
And just to make the point that both the products and the services that Epic and Gamban provide, they're not specifically mentioned within the standards by name, but the services are the gold standard. If a sports organisation has any of these services or has training and education, it has offers the blocking software to athletes within their leagues, that is the gold standard. And sponsors will increasingly be looking at that to protect their reputations from any harm caused by match fixing or manipulation of sports results.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think if gambling has been liberalised to the extent that it's promoted in sport and athletes are promoting it, then they're promoting it in a context where they're not allowed to engage in it, and in a context where it's extremely normalised. And so, as I mentioned before, gambling-related harm is almost inevitable, and sports governing bodies and leagues have to support athletes if they come into trouble with gambling. They absolutely have to. It's imperative. If athletes don't feel like they're going to be supported if they've got a gambling addiction, then they're not going to speak up about it. They're not going to seek help. If the reaction of a sports governing body is to just ban that athlete for months for gambling, then that's going to make the problem worse for that individual. It's going to make the problem worse for the sport in the longer run. So we have to have a culture and a climate where athletes can speak openly about any gambling issues. And if they do, they're not going to be punished for it. They're going to be supported on the basis that this is a shared responsibility. If you're a sports governing body or a government and you have allowed gambling, the expansion of gambling into sport to the extent that we have, then you have to understand that this is an inevitability. This isn't like before where we had a system where we effectively tolerated gambling. We didn't liberalize it or encourage it. We just tolerated it. People wanted to do it. They knew where to find it, but it wasn't marketed constantly. And this is not a situation like that where people are fixing matches, with backstreet bookie runners. We're talking about real ubiquitous opportunities to gamble and the risks that are involved with those types of wagers that are offered. And the heightened risks. So I think there's so much that sports governing bodies can do if they reduce gambling-related harm among the athlete population, if they reduce it, if they have the measures in place to ensure that, that we balance sanctions with support. I don't think the FA has got the balance right on that, to be perfectly honest with Ivan Tony. I don't think that has been, I don't think it's been a good message to send to people who are maybe footballers who may be struggling with gambling problems. I don't think that that's the right message to be sending to sort of foreground the ban. I think that there has to be a support infrastructure in place. So I'm hoping that that's what will come of this. It's very much mission centered, as with everything, and we want to make sure that that sports governing bodies and leagues get the balance right, and that will reduce integrity issues in the longer run.
If I may, Alan, I'd just like to pass a comment, because I think Matt makes a very good and really, really important point about culture, and about players having the confidence to come forward and speak to people and look for advice and look for support and admit that they have a problem. And I don't think we have got that right across the global sporting game right now. I mean, imagine that, and this is when we talk about this 360-degree scenario whereby we create an environment in which an athlete that is developing gambling harm or out of control gambling tendencies, and even if that individual is able to identify that within themselves, how confident would they be to come forward and have a conversation? Or would they fear the repercussion? The situation that Matt refers to with Ivan Toney is that we've gone very heavy on the punishment. So now you create an environment where individuals are going to say, well, I'm not going to admit to that because I'm now very fearful of that repercussion. I might get suspended. I might get fined. I might get sacked, which leads to a lack of career. I might get berated in the press. So I'm not going to come forward. Actually, the opposite is what we're trying to achieve here. We're trying to create an environment in which that entire organization approaches this with a great deal of empathy and understanding, which actually encourages athletes and other individuals working in the sports organization to come forward. And things like the SERV certification. I mean, imagine working for an organization that has the gold standard of universal sports integrity through SIGA. I mean, you're working for an organization you already immediately identify and recognize that is an organization that is committed to educating people, to providing software to help people, to invest in this area. You are much more likely to think that actually I'm working and operating in an environment where this will be understood if I want to come forward and have a conversation. So this solution is very much about trying to create that environment in which people can feel confident to come forward. And I just wanted to mention that because I thought it was an incredibly important point that Matt raises about the culture. Yes, education is important. Yes, monitoring is important, but creating that culture is absolutely fundamental to the success here. And again, that's where you get safer gambling and sports integrity working hand in hand. If you create that environment, create that culture, then breaches of sports integrity will reduce drastically.
Katie, I think as our hostess, I should leave you with the last word because it's time to wrap up.
That's I'm going to enjoy that. Normally, our CEO has the last word, so I will tell him I had the last word. But I think the last word is accountability, and that's what SIGA's bringing, and that's how you actually influence culture change. So I would encourage everybody watching, everybody who has a role in the sports industry to come together to join our global platform. It's not owned by SIGA, it's owned by you, to showcase, promote your sport integrity services, the good work that you're doing if you're at the sports organizations, and really be part of a future that safeguards, protects sport integrity worldwide, and actually be part of an industry that we can all be proud of. So UNLV, thank you for hosting us. It's been fantastic. You are beacons of light when it comes to this subject matter, and we look forward to continuing our discussions and also turning those into tangible actions.
Well, as do we. Martin, Matt, thank you all so very, very much. For all of you who have been watching, thank you, and happy Sport Integrity Week.